Excellent!
Sometimes you just gotta hit record. Hi everyone and welcome to Paul's Hardware. My voice is a little rough today, so sorry about that. I have had kind of a rough week. It's been a transition week, but I'm trying to get some work done, and I actually have some time today to do that because my wife and daughter are out of the house for a little bit right now. I really haven't done much planning or setup for this so far, so everything's going to be really rough and off the cuff for today. So there's lots of stuff I could be working on. Like, there's this whole pile of stuff over here that's been collecting for 6 months. I should be cleaning that up. My sister arrived this morning with her computer, which needs some repair work done on it, so I'm hopefully going to be tinkering with that. But my real goal for like a couple weeks now has been to do some further testing on my RTX 3080s. And for the RTX 3080s, there's some new information that has come out with regards to overclock speeds, maintaining high overclock speeds up over 2 gigahertz, questions about third-party designs of the card and the reference design as compared to the Founders Edition. So I've got basically 4 3080s that I'm going to test today. I've got the Zotac Trinity Gaming 3080. I have the NVIDIA Founders Edition that I can hopefully use as a little bit of a baseline. Then we've got the Gigabyte RTX 3080 Gaming OC. And we've got the ASUS TUF RTX 3080, which is also the OC variant. My original plan was to take the build that I did last week in the Corsair 4000D and use that as sort of a test bed to test these cards and show real-world performance and thermals and everything in the case. But now, because I'm a day shorter of time than I was expecting to have, and also because this new information has come out about potential instability for some of these cards, I'm going to be doing some more direct testing. I will be doing some thermal comparisons. I'll also be trying to replicate the issue that people have been experiencing with some cards crashing to desktop when the GPU is running at a clock speed higher than 2 gigahertz. Those are my general guidelines for what I'm going to try to do, but honestly, when I come at testing videos like this, or when I've done it in the past, I get too caught up in the planning stages and trying to plan everything out perfectly for what I'm going to do, and then I stick to that too much. So instead of that, today I'm just going to start testing. I'll give you guys updates along the way as to what I'm seeing and experiencing, and hopefully that will give you guys either a bit more peace of mind for these cards, or maybe a little bit of warning as to what you should expect as they become more widely available and stock actually becomes purchasable in the future. That said, I'm going to get started. Alright, so I've done a bit of setup over here in my benchmarking corner, and I think I've decided on how I'm going to proceed for my initial testing. Right now I've just got the Founders Edition in there so I can do some baseline testing for the 3080. And here's my first results. I'm just going to get the out-of-the-box thermals at the whatever clock speed that the card ships at. I'm recording the base, boost, and average clock speed during my test, which is going to be a 15-minute run playing Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Then over here on the left monitor, I can record stuff like the base and boost clock for each card that I'm testing. I'm going to do 15-minute runs, and then we'll see the average temperature, which has been 76 degrees for this particular card, and also the average GPU clock, which is always going to fluctuate a little bit since it's bouncing around between 1860, 1905, here and there, sometimes 1845, but 1857, 1858 is what the average has been so far for this. Once that first test finishes to get the thermals and frequency, then I will run MSI Afterburner to do a bit of an overclock, see if pushing past 2000 megahertz can affect the stability at all of these cards. Reports so far are that the Founders Edition and the ASUS TUF card that I have probably aren't going to experience that, but the Zotac Trinity as well as the Gigabyte card that I have do have reports of those issues and are using the 6 POSCAP configuration for the power delivery right back behind the GPU. I will get to those cards in a bit. For now, let's try the overclocking with the Founders Edition. So just trying to do a quick and dirty overclock. I have the fan speed set to a fixed 80%, which is a lot louder than, I mean, relatively louder than it is at stock, but it is keeping things cooler and allowing us to hit with just a moderate plus 50 on the core clock and maxing the power limit there. We are now at just over 2 gigahertz on the GPU, so that's nice. I have reset stuff here so we can monitor average speeds, and I'm going to play for a bit, see what happens. See if those temperatures get any higher. Whoa, I just crashed to desktop. Just got a DirectX error. I was bumping the clock speed up a little bit. We were at plus 69 giggity, and we got 2040 max on the frequency it was hitting, although I didn't see what it was actually running at when we crashed to desktop. That said, this could be an unstable overclock, which is essentially what we're saying those other cards are experiencing as well, but that said, let's try this again. So part of the reason I'm doing this pretty informally today is because I'm just trying to do what I have time to do, and as a result, I think I need to stop testing the Founders Edition and move on. Here's where we're at though. I realized that when it crashed, for some reason the fan speed had dropped. So I bumped that back up. It's at 81% now. Kept that plus 69 in core clock, overclock, and that has been giving us GPU clock speeds that have been fluctuating between 1980, 2010 here and getting up to 2025 max. But our average is creeping up closer and closer to 2 gigahertz. So that's pretty good. And it has been stable for the past over 5 minutes that I've been playing. It's even running cooler than it was in the initial testing, but again, that's because I just brute forced the fan curve and we're just dealing with a much louder card relative to how it runs at stock. For Founders Edition though, it looks like we can achieve a 2000 gigahertz, give or take, overclock. Did encounter some instability, but was able to sort of level that off with bumping up the cooling. And of course, prior to the overclock, didn't encounter any instability at all. So next up is the ASUS TUF card. ASUS TUF RTX 3080 is installed. By the way, in case you're wondering, we're using the release drivers for these tests, 456.38 from NVIDIA. I'm playing Shadow of the Tomb Raider in 4K at very high settings. The TUF's out-of-the-box overclock bumps the boost clock from 1710 up to 1785, so let's see how it performs. Alright, we're up over 15 minutes yet again, so here are my clock speeds, averaging just shy of 1900. Just shy. Again, it's bouncing between 1890, 1920, 1935-ish, 1965 max. And good job by ASUS on that cooler for the TUF RTX 3090 because we've only hit 64 degrees C max, averaging 63 C, so still plenty of thermal headroom there. I am making more progress in Shadow of the Tomb Raider than I ever have before, so that's cool too. Let's move on to some overclocking. So we're overclocked now with the TUF card. Got some bit of gameplay going on, but I haven't been playing for a while yet. I just wanted to show you guys the settings. Power limit on this card only goes up to 110, so I maxed that out. Core clock is just plus 25, because again, we already started with the manufacturer overclock. That brings the boost up to 1810 compared to 1785, what the original was, compared to 1710 on the Founders Edition. Also cranked up the fan speed to 86, so once again, we're gonna see temperatures that might even be lower than what they were originally, but again, I'm gonna give this 5-10 minutes of gameplay and see what kind of stability we're seeing. Clock speeds right now are not quite hitting 2000, so I might need to bump that OC up a little bit. Well, hey, look at that. I was able to induce a crash to desktop even with the ASUS card. But again, I was just cranking that clock speed up and up and up. So I got up to plus 92, which meant that we were hitting up to 2070 on the core clock. And then the GPU clock was in the 2010 to 2040 range there when it crashed. Poor Laura just got attacked by like a group of panthers. They always work in packs, but I think I've gotten as far as I can with this card. I backed off the overclock just a little bit down to plus 76 on the core clock, and I did max out the fan speed, which was resulting in pretty low GPU temps, 58 degrees, maybe 57 on average, so not running warm at all. And this has allowed us to get the GPU clock up to, well, over 2 gigahertz once again, actually hitting 2070 megahertz peak one more time, averaging just shy of 2 gigahertz, but it's again fluctuating between that 1980 and 2010 megahertz frequency, and it does seem to be sticking to 2 gigahertz more often than not. Again, with my time limitation, it's hard for me to tell if these are going to be stable long-term overclocks, but the game has been stable since I set it, and I haven't had any further crashes. So I'm happy to say that the 2 cards that I wasn't expecting to crash out of the box didn't crash out of the box, but I was able to induce that with an overclock. Granted, if you're overclocking in general, you're going to be able to push it far enough that you cause a crash, but I think the point here is, are people getting shipped cards that are going to crash just plugging them in and playing, or is it going to have to be something like overclocking that causes that to happen? If the cards that have the POSCAP layout on the back with all 6 of those capacitors, rather than using 1 or 2 MLCC arrays, are more prone to crashing at lower clocks, then that definitely is a concern. But to me, right now at least, it's seeming like the RTX 3080 just has a hard time hitting clock speeds well above 2 gigahertz, which does seem to be the indication in a lot of the overclocking stuff that's gone up so far since launch on this card. There's not a lot of headroom there. That said, I'm going to pack up the ASUS TUF card, and I think we'll switch to the Gigabyte Gaming OC next. Okay, I've once again hit over the 15-minute mark for gameplay here, and our GPU temperature has averaged at 66 degrees Celsius. so not bad at all. Just a few degrees warmer than the ASUS card. At the same time, our average clock speed is 1885 here. Again, that's just slightly behind the ASUS TUF card by maybe 10 or 15 megahertz overall. GPU clock has been bouncing between 1910, 1890, and it looks like the max that we hit was 1935. Have not had any crashes or anything here at stock, so that's good. Just as before, I am now going to do a little bit of overclocking and see if I can prod some instability out of this card, or otherwise see what clock speeds it can hit with a brief bit of OCing. Real quick bonus test for the Gigabyte RTX 3080. I had to step away for a bit, so I just left this running, and after 43 minutes, the GPU clock average was 1888 and still maintained that 66 degrees operating temperature. Granted, it was just sitting here, but just thought I'd throw that in as well. Anyway, moving on. I'm finally getting the GPU clock up over 2 gigahertz, and that is with the core clock pushed all the way to plus 108. That's quite a bit more than what I had to do for the other two cards, so the boost is now up to 1893. And I am running at 100% fan speed, which means my GPU temps are down to 59 degrees Celsius, 57 on average, but this is just for a couple minutes. I haven't seen a crash so far, and I would say it's still averaging below 2 gigahertz right now, so I might push it just a little bit more. Oop. Alright, cool. So I've successfully crashed out the Gigabyte card as well. Right, you? Can you hush? Anyway, though, my peak GPU clock there was 2055, and at the time of the crash it was hovering, again, just like right around 2 gigahertz, maybe a little bit higher. And I did set the core clock to plus 116, which gave me a boost of 1901. Zotac Trinity is installed and ready to go next, and one thing I've noticed right off the bat is I do not have the overclocked version of this card. Thought I did. I guess I should have looked closer at the box, but 1710 is the boost clock on this one, which is the same as the Founders Edition. Alright, time for 15 more minutes of Tomb Raider. So as expected, I was able to play without too much incident. We've been capturing our data for over 16 minutes yet again, and haven't had any problems. Average temperature for out-of-the-box thermals is 73 degrees Celsius, and our GPU clock has been in the mid to upper 1800s, but averaging at 1824. It did peak at 1950, so this being the non-OC version of the card, we're not hitting higher average frequencies. I'm gonna see if I can overclock it and fix that. Well, that didn't take long at all. I cranked up the fan speed. This is definitely the loudest card at 100% fan speed right now. It's at 90%, and you can probably hear that. Power limit on this one maxes at 105, so that's the lowest of all of these cards. And the core clock right now is at plus 108, which was too much for it almost immediately. Fan speed again is at 90. Incidentally, it did do a pretty big boost on the GPU clock speed there, up to 2100 megahertz. So that's probably has something to do with it. Oops, it happened again. All right, maybe I should start low and then work my way up rather than, yeah. Alright, we're doing better this time around. We're at plus 29 on the core clock. But it's really interesting how the different cards respond to just these settings here. With that first overclock I did, it suddenly jumped up to 2100 megahertz. And the second time I did it, I had the core clock down only still at like plus 50 or so, and it jumped up to like 2065 megahertz, which again is pretty high. Now with it at still 105 power limit and plus 29 on the core clock, we are maxing at 2025 megahertz, and we are hitting something less than that in the mid 1900s, which is a decent little boost over what it ships at. So that's cool, but it does seem pretty touchy. I'm gonna see if I can maybe add a little bit more, and then see if I can get a little bit of gameplay in to get some averages. Oh no, the freaking Jaguar's back. Get off her! Get off her, you bastard! Ooh, nice shot, oh, I was supposed to push a button there. There we go. Oh good, a flashback scene. Alright, I let this test run for a little bit longer because this card had been exhibiting the most instability. So we're at 12, almost 13 minutes now. The average temperature is 62 degrees Celsius, and our GPU clock has been bouncing from 1905 to 1920 to 1935. That's giving us an average of about 1915 and a peak of 2010. So just over 2 gigahertz, but the average here is definitely less than the other 3 cards that I've tested so far. Ended up settling on a plus 37 core clock, which put the boost to 1747. And that, again, this isn't a super lengthy stress test or anything like that, but at this point, based on how it was performing before, I think this is relatively stable. There's one last thing that I would like to do before I close out this video. But basically I want to take the heatsink and backplate off of this card to take a look at the power delivery configuration back there behind the GPU. Gonna have to clean some thermal paste off of that pad there, but I've got it apart, and here's a look at this side. I still gotta get the backplate off though. That's how I always do this. And there it is, 6 POSCAPs. No MLCCs used for the final stage power delivery to the GPU. This reconfirms from Jay's video where he discovered the same thing, and if you have no idea what I'm talking about, then you've probably been pretty confused for most of this video, but it seems like no major GPU launch can go by without there being some sort of kerfuffle or drama or something like that, something that people are pointing at to be like, aha, they screwed up. And to be fair here, I would completely agree that there's screw-ups going on if people are buying cards that they are running at stock, running without doing any overclocking or anything like that, and they're finding that there is instability. And that does appear to be the case according to many reports online. Now, according to an article on Igor's lab that has been further amplified by Jay, as well as other reports, there might be some issues with the power delivery, the final stage of power delivery for the GPU, and the configuration that was laid out by NVIDIA for the reference design of the RTX 2080. The black rectangles that you can see there are called POSCAPs, and they are the final stage capacitors, and they are mounted directly behind the GPU. And the idea is that NVIDIA told third-party manufacturers that it was okay to go with 6 of them like this, but some board designers have chosen to do a different array of capacitors, which is a small set of MLCC type capacitors, and you can see 2 groupings of those there in the middle of this card, which happens to be the MSI RTX 3090 Gaming X Trio. Now, to be clear, there's nothing inherently better or worse about POSCAPs or MLCCs. They both have different inherent capabilities and characteristics. The fact is, though, that it might be the case that this type of configuration is not the ideal configuration for running an RTX 2080 at higher frequencies. However, let's take a look at my results here, if you can read my scribble of handwriting. I'm sorry, I don't write stuff out very often anymore, but we got the 3080 Founders Edition, the ASUS TUF, the Gigabyte OC, and the Zotac Trinity Gaming. Remember, the ASUS and the Gigabyte are both overclocked out of the box, so they have boost clocks set to 1785, whereas the Zotac and the Founders Edition's boost clocks are at 1710. With everything at stock, I did not have any crashes with any of my testing. Granted, I'm just testing one game, I'm doing limited testing, so bear all of that stuff in mind. I'm not trying to call into question anyone who's saying that they have experienced crashes. All I'm saying is that my cards did not happen to do that. But they also weren't running at over 2 gigahertz. The ASUS averaged the highest average frequency at 1899, followed by the Gigabyte with 1886, followed by the Founders Edition at 1857, and then the Zotac at 1825. When I went for my overclock, remember, all of the cards crashed when they were running over 2 gigahertz. And that, I think, is something that is a key takeaway from this video. If you're talking about ambient overclocking, you're not going to see too much, at least from what I'm seeing here and from other reports online, beyond 2 gigahertz for an RTX 3080. Average stable clock I hit for the 3080 Founders Edition was 1995, then 1999 for the ASUS, then 1995 again for the Gigabyte. The Zotac, I had a harder time getting stable. There were multiple crashes, and the Zotac, by the way, has the same array as the Gigabyte here. But the Gigabyte card was very stable, and the Zotac was not. So this could potentially be an issue of GPU binning. There might, again, potentially be other issues with the card design that are causing it not to be able to hit that speed other than GPU binning. But again, remember that the multiple crashes I saw were because it was really touchy when I was overclocking, hitting really high frequencies, causing the crash. So it's possible that this overclock could be bumped closer to 2 gigahertz if we had a little bit more time for driver maturity, or maybe using different software for the overclock itself. That said, running close to 100% fan speed, the Gigabyte was actually the coolest card at 54 degrees. But those are my results, you guys, and again, all of these cards were stable for me out of the box. All of them crashed when pushed past 2 gigahertz. The Zotac Trinity was definitely the least stable in my overclocking attempts, but I can't 100% blame that on the POSCAP situation versus MLCCs because again, we have a Gigabyte card that has that same array. There are other differences between the cards, but that is all the time I have for testing today. I do want to point out that there are at least 2 companies now that have come out and addressed this directly, so I do think there is something there to the POSCAP versus MLCC situation, and which is the more ideal solution. EVGA came out with a statement saying that's part of the reason why they delayed their For the Win cards was because in pre-launch testing they encountered instability at higher clock speeds as well, and they wanted to do something to address that prior to launching the cards. And then Colorful, according to Jay, has reached out to reviewers who received samples. I believe Keith also received a Colorful sample that they are replacing with an updated version that doesn't have all POSCAP capacitors on the back. But lastly, again, if I haven't given enough caveats throughout this video, my testing here was just what I could get done today. It is fairly limited. I was only playing 1 game. So I'm just trying to throw some additional information out there, some additional results, since I do have access to multiple cards right now. And I hope you guys have learned a little bit from this video, but my voice is getting gradually worse and worse, so I'm gonna cut this off. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hit the thumbs up button if you enjoyed it, and we'll see you guys in the next one.